Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. We're diving into a topic today that I think is really important for a lot of people,
Yeah.
and that is creating supportive spaces for autistic folks, and especially those who've experienced religious trauma.
Yeah, it's such important work.
Yeah.
And I think it's something that often gets overlooked.
Definitely. And our listeners have asked for more on this,
Mm-hmm.
and thankfully we have a great source to guide us today, and that is the final episode of the Cheap ABA blog and podcast.
Which, by the way, is doing incredible work making this kind of information accessible, like their name suggests.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we unpack all of this,
Yeah.
can you give us a little background on ABA itself for anyone who might not be familiar with the term?
Absolutely. ABA stands for Applied Behavior Analysis, and it's a type of therapy that's used to help individuals, often those on the autism spectrum, develop skills and reduce challenging behaviors.
Yeah.
However, ABA can sometimes be really expensive and inaccessible. Hence the name Cheap ABA, which aims to provide resources and support to make it available for everyone.
That makes a lot of sense. And then it also highlights why this deep dive is so important, because if it's already a challenge to access support, imagine going through something as difficult as religious trauma
Right.
without the right spaces to heal.
And that's where I think the unique needs of autistic individuals really come in because, they might experience things like sensory overload
Yeah.
or have difficulty with social communication, which can make navigating religious spaces and practices particularly challenging.
Yeah. It's like adding another layer of complexity
Exactly.
to an already complex situation.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin? Thankfully, Cheap ABA gives us some really practical steps. And the first one that really resonated with me is education and raising awareness.
It seems obvious, but honestly, you'd be surprised how often that gets missed.
Right.
It's not just about putting up a poster or two.
Yeah.
We need targeted workshops, especially for community and religious leaders,
Okay.
that help them understand the lived experiences of autistic individuals.
Like, have you ever heard of a sensory simulation?
I have. I actually participated in one a few years back.
Wow.
They basically guide you through a series of exercises designed to mimic sensory overload.
Okay.
And let me tell you, it was intense.
Really?
Even just trying to process information with flashing lights and loud noises blaring was so overwhelming, and I can't imagine dealing with that on a regular basis.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how important it is to have spaces that are designed with sensory sensitivities in mind.
Exactly. And beyond simulations, we need readily available resources, think brochures, websites
Okay.
that clearly explain autism,
Yeah.
sensory processing differences, and religious trauma.
Right.
This way, anyone can access the information and educate themselves.
It makes sense though, right?
Yeah.
Knowledge is power. Like, if we want to create truly inclusive spaces,
Yeah.
people need to be informed.
Absolutely.
But information alone isn't enough. Right.
The Cheap ABA episode also emphasizes the need for sensory-friendly environments.
And this is where understanding sensory processing differences is so important.
Yep.
Because, some autistic individuals might be hypersensitive to certain stimuli, like bright lights
Right?
or loud noises,
Yeah.
while others might be hyposensitive and actually crave more sensory input.
So it's about finding that balance.
Exactly.
Creating environments that are calming and comfortable for everyone.
Yes.
And thankfully, making spaces sensory-friendly doesn't require, a complete overhaul.
No, not at all.
Right.
Even small adjustments can make a huge difference.
Like what?
Think about dimming the lights,
Okay.
offering noise-canceling headphones,
Yeah.
or even just having a designated quiet space where people can go
Right.
if they need to take a break.
It's about being mindful of those sensory details that might not even register
Yeah.
for neurotypical individuals.
That's
And I
correct.
remember reading about this one community center.
That actually redesigned their entire space to be more sensory-friendly.
Wow.
They installed dimmable lighting. They used sound-absorbing materials.
That's
They
great.
even created a sensory garden with different textures and scents.
And that's incredible.
Right.
I bet that made a world of difference for the people using that space.
Absolutely.
It's about creating an environment where everyone feels welcome and comfortable,
Yeah.
regardless of their sensory needs.
Absolutely. And speaking of feeling welcome,
Yeah.
the next step, Cheap ABA highlights, is open communication, which honestly is crucial in any community,
Yes.
but especially when addressing something as sensitive as religious trauma.
And this isn't just about, having a suggestion box that nobody reads.
Right.
It's about creating ongoing two-way dialogue
Yeah.
where autistic individuals and their families
Right.
feel safe sharing their experiences and providing feedback.
It's about really listening to those voices
Yeah.
and taking their feedback seriously.
Yeah.
I know some organizations are hesitant to change longstanding traditions or practices,
Right. Yeah.
but sometimes those changes are necessary
Mm,
to create a more inclusive and welcoming environment.
absolutely. It's about recognizing that there's always room for growth and adaptation.
Yeah.
And who knows, those changes might even enhance the experiences of
Yeah,
the community members as well.
That's a great point. It's
Mm.
not always about making like separate accommodations,
Yeah.
but rather finding ways to create experiences that are universally accessible
Right.
and enjoyable.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, the episode also talks about encouraging diverse expressions of faith,
Mm,
which I thought was really interesting.
right. Because spirituality is such a personal experience
Yeah,
and it can manifest in so many different ways.
absolutely. So it's not just about accommodating different needs.
Yeah.
It's about celebrating those differences
Yeah.
and recognizing that there isn't one right way
Mm-hmm.
to connect with one's spirituality.
Exactly. And this might mean offering a variety of worship options,
Okay.
incorporating different sensory experiences into services,
No.
or even just being open to individual expressions of faith.
Like, what if instead of just having a traditional prayer service,
Mm-hmm.
a community also offered guided meditations,
Yeah.
nature walks, or even art journaling as a way to connect with spirituality?
I love that.
Right.
It's about recognizing that spirituality can be experienced through movement, through creativity, through connecting with nature.
This reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about a specific religious tradition that's known for its adaptability.
Oh, yes. There's this branch of Buddhism
Yeah.
that emphasizes adapting practices to fit individual needs and circumstances.
Interesting.
They have this saying, let go of what doesn't serve you. Embrace what helps you grow.
Wow, I love that. So it's about finding what works for you
Mm-hmm.
on your own spiritual journey.
Exactly. And that leads us to the final
Okay.
and perhaps most crucial step Cheap ABA highlights, and that is building strong support networks.
Because let's be real, healing from religious trauma can be so isolating,
Yeah.
especially if you're also navigating the unique challenges of being autistic.
Absolutely. It's so
Yeah.
important to have those support systems in place.
Right.
And that's where I think peer support groups can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah. It's like having a space where you can connect with people who truly understand your experiences
Right.
without judgment.
Yes.
People who've been there too.
Exactly. And those shared experiences can be so validating. Just knowing you're not alone in this can make a world of difference.
And beyond just sharing experiences, these groups can also be incredible resources for connecting people with therapists, counselors,
Right.
or support organizations that specialize in religious trauma and autism.
Absolutely, because finding the right support can be life-changing.
Yes.
But we also have to acknowledge that in-person support groups aren't always accessible
Right.
for everyone,
Yeah.
especially in smaller communities.
That's so true. But thankfully, in this digital age, we have online communities,
Yeah.
and they can be just as valuable,
Hmm.
providing that same sense of connection and support,
When
no matter
we're-
where you are in the world.
I completely agree. There are so many online forums, support groups, even
Yeah.
virtual meetups
Lot.
dedicated to these very topics.
This is
It's
amazing.
just a matter of finding the ones that resonate with you.
And that brings us to the final point from the Cheap ABA episode that really struck me.
Okay.
And it's this idea of reclaiming narratives,
I love that they brought that up.
right?
Because for so long, the narratives surrounding autism and religious trauma have been dominated by others.
It's so true. It's often been outsiders telling those stories,
Yeah.
and usually from a deficit-based perspective.
Exactly. So
Okay.
reclaiming narratives is about empowering autistic individuals to share their own experiences in their own words
Yes.
and on their own terms.
Because those stories are valid, they're powerful,
Mm-hmm.
and they deserve to be heard.
Absolutely.
And it makes you think about how we can all be better allies and advocates
Yes.
in amplifying those voices.
100%.
Well, you have given us so much to think about
All
today.
right, you've been great talking about it.
To our listeners, if you're feeling overwhelmed, remember those action steps.
Mm-hmm.
Education, sensory-friendly spaces, open communication,
Yeah.
diverse expressions of faith,
Yes.
and of course, building those strong support networks.
So important.
And if there's one thing I hope you take away from this deep dive, it's this. You're not alone.
So true. There are people who care.
Yes.
There are resources available, and there is hope for healing.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And as always, we want to hear from you what resonated with you today. What are your thoughts on reclaiming narratives? Head over to our social media pages and share your thoughts. You can find us on Mention Platform at Mention Username. And until next time, keep diving deep, everyone.